Well, let's get you more on this. We can speak to a senior researcher at Human Rights Watch Africa Division, Leticia. Thanks very much for speaking to France 24 today. Amnesty then has already sounded the alarm on this escalating conflict. It's thought scores of people have been massacred. What is it that you're hearing where you are?
Well, there's no question that the crisis is escalating and really could turn into both a humanitarian but also human rights disaster right now. I mean, we are also investigating the allegations that many local residents in the western part of the Tigray region were killed a few days ago. There are also a lot of casualties which were brought into the neighboring region, predominantly from blunt object wounds. So there's a lot of digging and investigations which need to happen. But one of the problems right now with this crisis is that basically the federal government continues to shut down communications. So there are no phone communications, there's no internet. So both for independent reporting and monitoring, but also for the humanitarian community who absolutely need to understand the scale and magnitude of the response which is needed inside the Tigray region, it's incredibly difficult right now.
I mean, you spoke about, a humanitarian disaster brewing there. We are hearing more and more reports of, growing numbers of people fleeing, heading into Sudan, other neighbouring areas. I mean, what do we know about that? Presumably, the need for aid there is as intense as it is in the Tigray region.
I think it's important to take a bit of a step back. I mean, the Tigray region is a region which, even before the crisis escalated over a week ago, was a region where there were over 500,000 people who needed humanitarian assistance on an ongoing basis. So this is a region where there is a lot of the population who are in need. And what we're hearing from reports of from the UN of individuals who are arriving in neighboring Sudan, which, as you said, I mean, so the area of Sudan where the refugees are arriving into is an area which already has a significant Eritrean refugee population. So on the one hand, there is some infrastructure in place, but this is an incredibly volatile area as well. The infrastructure in place is obviously not in place to cope with the influx we're seeing at the moment. And the reports which are coming out so far are these are people who are fleeing, many of them children, according to the UN Refugee Agency. We're talking about half of the 17,000 who have arrived are children, and they're fleeing with absolutely nothing. So, we are not only, as you point out, talking about a terrible situation, or what we believe to be an escalating crisis inside the Tigray region, but one which is obviously going to have a much broader regional impact.
And Leticia Beda, I mean, what is Human Rights Watch calling for at this stage before this begins to get out of hand, which it has in many senses already?
I mean, first and foremost, obviously, that all actors which are involved inside the Tigray region at the moment are protecting the right to life of individuals, but also that the federal government is immediately restoring communications. I mean, as I pointed out, it's not only a question of humanitarian access and analysis and also ability of journalists to report on what's going on, but it's also individuals from the region who can't contact their loved ones right now. We speak to a lot of people in Addis and in other parts of Ethiopia and further afield who can't call back home, so they don't know what's happening to their family. So obviously communications need to be restored, as does air and also road methods of transport, which are currently shut down as well. So there are definitely immediate measures which need to be taken. More broadly, I think it's very important to place what is obviously in many ways a unique crisis, but in the broader context of Ethiopia, which for the last 18 months has been seeing an escalating political and human rights crisis in many parts of the country. So it's absolutely key for the federal government to move forward with a lot of the commitments it had made in its first year in office around accountability for past but also recent abuses. I mean, we are still talking about a government which has readily clamped down on legitimate expressions of dissent in a very heavy-handed manner. So we're talking about grievances which are being heard in many parts of the country And all those issues need to be dealt with if we aren't going to see what is right now a crisis in the Tigray region escalating even more in other parts of the country.
OK, Leticia Beja, you're a senior researcher at Human Rights Watch Africa Division. Thank you for your time today. To the US.